Welcome to Left Africa.
Tomorrow, about 1.4 billion people across the African continent are going to turn on their televisions to watch a football match.
It's an absolutely massive audience.
Right. But the staggering amount of money generated by those 1.4 billion pairs of eyes tuning in, basically almost all of it gets sucked right out of the continent.
Yeah, deposited directly into a bank account in Zurich, Switzerland.
Exactly. Welcome to the 2026 World Cup.
I mean, look, it is the largest sporting event in human history, but the financial and, well, the political mechanics operating quietly beneath the surface are vastly more complicated than, whatever's actually happening on the pitch.
And that is exactly what we are tearing into for this deep dive, because tomorrow is June 11, 2026.
Yeah.
The kickoff of just a historically massive tournament.
Oh, it's huge.
48 teams, 104 matches spread across the United States, Canada, and Mexico.
Right.
And the opening match features the host nation, Mexico, taking on South Africa. Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can dive into the heavy geopolitical theories, we really have to ground ourselves in the physical reality of what is actually happening in Mexico City tomorrow.
Which is quite a story in itself.
It is. You have a classic David versus Goliath scenario, but the historical baggage on both sides is just immense.
Let's start with Goliath, right? Mexico is currently ranked number 14 in the world. They are the undisputed traditional powerhouse of CONCACAF.
Which is the North, Central American, and Caribbean football region.
Right, exactly. But despite their absolute dominance in their own backyard, they suffer from this massive historical psychological barrier.
The famous curse.
Yes, they call it the Quinto Partido, the fifth match. For decades, they easily advance out of the group stages, but they always hit a brick wall in the knockout rounds.
They just cannot reach that fifth match.
Right, they just can't.
And now, they're playing on home soil in front of their own fans. The desperation to finally shatter that ceiling has to be absolutely suffocating for those players.
Suffocating is definitely the right word. And then on the other side of the pitch, you have South Africa, affectionately known as Bafana Bafana.
Who are basically the ultimate underdog here.
Oh, completely. They are sitting at the absolute bottom of the betting markets, like facing 501 odds to win this tournament.
Wow.
Yeah, and they haven't even qualified for a World Cup in 16 years, dating back to when they, actually hosted the tournament themselves back in 2010.
Right, which makes the profile of their coach, Hugo Broos, so interesting in this dossier. Reading about his management style, he sounds less like a traditional football manager and, well, more like a ruthless corporate turnaround CEO.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
You know the type. Like a massive company is bleeding money, the board brings in an outsider, and the very first thing he does on Monday morning is fire the most popular, highest paid executive in the building.
Just to send a message.
Exactly. Just to prove that the old rules no longer apply. Because Broos famously and very controversially dropped South Africa's biggest star, Percy Tau.
Which was a massive shock.
Tau is a veteran. He's their all-time assist leader. And Broos just cut him from the squad because he had a slow start in the qualifiers. The South African media apparently lost its collective mind over this.
Naturally.
So my question is, does the Left Africa author actually believe this young, inexperienced squad actually has the venom to justify dropping a star like that?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the dossier completely validates Bruce's ruthlessness. It points out the actual mechanism behind his madness.
Which is what? Exactly.
Bruce isn't just trying to make headlines right. He is engineering a very specific, ego-free system. He actually did the exact same thing years ago when he led Cameroon to an Africa Cup of Nations title.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. And when he rebuilt Rwanda's national team, too. He deliberately targets younger domestic league players who don't have those multi-million-dollar European contracts.
So they're hungrier.
Exactly. They are hungry enough to execute his defensive, counterattacking discipline without ever questioning his authority.
That perfectly explains the dossier's focus on the team's captain, Ronwen Williams. They dedicate a whole section just to praising the spine of the team, rather than, flashy wingers.
Williams is basically the anchor of that entire strategy. He is a phenomenal goalkeeper, a recognized penalty-saving specialist.
Right, the AFCON tournament.
Yes, during the 2023 AFCON, he famously saved 4 spot kicks in a single shootout.
That's just absurd. 4 saves.
It really is. And Broos has basically built a fortress in front of him. You've got a midfield destroyer named Mathobi Mavala and a lone striker, Evidence Magopa.
The dossier's description of Magopa is great. It describes him as a player who runs the channels like a man determined to humiliate every European scout who claims African strikers lack tactical finishing skills.
I love that line. It really paints a picture of a team playing with a massive collective chip on its shoulder.
It really does.
Yeah.
But, there is this incredible irony the dossier highlights about how they even made it this far. The South African Football Association, SAFA.
Oh, yes, SAFA.
It's historically described in the text as this perpetually chaotic, disorganized, and deeply underfunded institution. Yet somehow, they succeeded in qualifying.
Yeah, and the author argues they succeeded basically because they were disorganized.
Wait, really? Because of chaos?
Exactly. The Federation was dealing with so many internal financial crises that they essentially forgot to interfere with the national team.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they accidentally just left their head coach completely alone to do his job. That lack of meddling allowed Broos to maintain his rigid system, and they grinded out a crucial 1-0 qualification win against Nigeria.
And Nigeria's federation was actively imploding at the time, right?
Right. It's the ultimate failing upward story for the executives, but a massive triumph of discipline for the coach and the players.
Okay, so if South Africa is this gritty, invisible underdog fighting for respect on the pitch, the dossier then pivots to argue that they're being deliberately made invisible by the presentation of the event itself.
Yes, this is where the text shifts focus.
Because to really understand what Bafana is up against, we have to look at the fortress they're walking into tomorrow.
And that fortress is the Estadio Banorte in Mexico City, though frankly, virtually every football fan on Earth knows it by its legendary former name, the Estadio Azteca.
I mean, this is arguably the most mythical cathedral in Latin American football. This is the exact grass where Pelé worked his magic for Brazil in 1970.
The history there is incredible.
And where Diego Maradona scored both the infamous Hand of God goal and the goal of the century in 1986.
But the dossier really laments what the stadium has become for 2026. The stadium underwent these massive renovations to meet modern FIFA standards. Right. And the author argues the soul of the stadium, that raucous, terrifying standing room atmosphere that literally birthed the Mexican wave, has been entirely sanitized.
It was very corporate now.
Exactly. It is completely all cedar, ringed with luxury corporate hospitality boxes, and even the mythical Azteca name was just sold off to a Mexican bank.
The corporate sterilization of a spiritual home. But yet the author's anger isn't actually focused primarily on the concrete and the corporate boxes.
No, not at all.
The real vitriol in the dossier is aimed at the opening ceremony, which kicks off 90 minutes before the match. The ceremony features this massive lineup of Mexican pop royalty, right? Maná, Alejandro Fernandez, Belinda.
Yep.
But what does not feature at all is a single African artist.
Not one. In a tournament where a record-breaking 10 African nations have qualified, the opening ceremony for a match featuring an African team includes 0 Afrobeats.
And 0 Amapiano.
Right, which is that massive pulsing house music genre that actually originated in South Africa and is currently dominating global charts.
Okay, so what does this all mean? Look, I have to play devil's advocate for a second and push back on the author here.
Sure, go ahead.
It is Mexico Stadium. It's their party. Of course they are going to hire Alejandro Fernandez and Belinda to perform for their home crowd.
That's the standard argument, yeah.
Plus, FIFA ultimately controls and approves these run of shows, not just the local Mexican organizing committee. So why is the LeftAfrica author framing this as some malicious symbolic erasure of Africa rather than just like standard local event planning?
Well, the dossier argues that you cannot separate event planning from historical context. They frame this entirely through the lens of a colonial hangover.
Colonial hangover.
Yeah. Look at the historical juxtaposition of the two nations taking the pitch. You have Mexico, which operated as the crown jewel of the Spanish Empire for 3 centuries, basically extracting silver for Europe.
Right.
And they are playing South Africa, a former British resource colony that was utilized as the ultimate laboratory for apartheid.
That is a very heavy collision of colonial histories.
It is. And the author's point is that FIFA, the global governing body, looked at a tournament featuring 10 African teams, looked at an opening match featuring South Africa, and just couldn't carve out 5 minutes of a globally broadcast ceremony to feature African cultural output.
Just 5 minutes.
Right. And the dossier argues this sends an undeniable message to the Global South, basically saying Africa is welcome to provide the physical labor on the pitch, but they're not here to be celebrated.
Wow. Welcome to provide the physical labor, but not to be celebrated. When you frame it like that, it stops being about a pop concert and starts being about structural disrespect.
Exactly.
And that flows directly into the dossier's sharpest, most controversial critiques. Because we aren't just talking about the borders of a sanitized corporate stadium anymore. The author really dives headfirst into the literal borders of the host nations.
Yes, the LeftAfrica text points out what they call a glaring contradiction. The 2026 World Cup markets itself as this ultimate celebration of global diversity and unity.
The world's game.
Right. Yet it is opening under the shadow of highly restrictive, targeted immigration policies enforced by the host nations themselves.
Let's break down the mechanics of what the source is claiming here, because they go into specifics. First, they target the United States.
They do.
The dossier brings up the Trump administration's expanded travel bans. Specifically, they mention Executive Orders 13780 and their successors moving into 2025.
Right. The ongoing policies.
According to the text, these policies heavily restricted entry from several African nations, including Sudan, Somalia, Libya, and Eritrea. But, the detail that really stands out in the dossier is a $15,000 U.S. visa bond scheme.
The mechanics of that bond scheme are just incredible to look at.
Yeah, explain how that worked.
It was essentially implemented as a pilot program targeting specific countries that the State Department claimed had high visa overstay rates, and many of those countries were in Africa. So, if a fan from one of those countries wanted to travel to the U.S. just to watch their team play, the government could demand a massive cash deposit of up to $15,000 just to issue a basic tourist visa.
That's insane. Now, the dossier does concede that FIFA intervened, right? They managed to get this bond scheme dropped for the actual players and official staff of the African teams.
Yes, the players were exempted.
But the author argues that the underlying architecture of suspicion remains firmly in place for the everyday fans and the diaspora trying to attend. And, they don't spare Mexico either.
Not at all. They are equally fierce toward Mexico's southern border policies. The text alleges a deeply documented record of systematic detention, deportation, and racial profiling of African migrants who are just attempting to transit through Mexican territory.
To really grasp the dynamic the author's getting at here, I think it helps to look at an analogy.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Think about it like a massive Silicon Valley tech company. The source is basically describing a situation where this company decides to outsource all of its raw foundational coding to developers in the Global South because they desperately need that specialized talent.
They need the product to work.
Exactly. But when the product finally launches and the company throws a massive, glitzy VIP gala at their California headquarters, those exact same developers who built the code aren't even allowed to apply for a visitor pass to attend the party.
They get interrogated at the door.
Right, while other guests waltz right in. They are treated purely as a resource to be extracted, not as humans to be welcomed.
And this raises an important question. It really acts as the central thesis of the LeftAfrica dossier. How do the host nations justify the cognitive dissonance?
Okay, you have to explain how they are applying cognitive dissonance in this specific context.
Well, the author is highlighting the glaring hypocrisy of a system that utilizes African bodies, the elite players, to fuel a highly lucrative global entertainment spectacle.
Right.
While those exact same governments simultaneously enforce militarized borders against African fans and migrants, the text argues that the structural message is very clear. Your athletic talent is a valuable commodity we will gladly import for our entertainment, but your people are considered a threat.
It's the ultimate commodification of human beings. We want the value you produce on the grass, but we will block you at the airport.
Exactly.
Which naturally forces you to ask.
Yeah.
Given these massive systemic hurdles, both the symbolic erasure at the stadium and the literal barriers at the borders, what does the presence of a record 10 African teams at this tournament actually signify?
Is it actual progress?
Right. Is it a sign of progress?
On paper, 10 teams sounds like an incredible numerical victory. It represents nearly a quarter of the expanded 48-team field.
That's a huge chunk.
It is. But the dossier takes a very cynical view here. They argue that this numerical strength actually serves to mask a deep, persistent structural weakness in global football.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because when you finally look at the underlying economics of this global tournament, the disparity is just mind-boggling.
It really is.
We mentioned the 1.4 billion people living across the African continent at the start. Football isn't just popular there, it is essentially the default religion. But the dossier breaks down how the broadcast revenue generated by those 1.4 billion sets of eyeballs actually operates.
Yeah, the mechanics of the broadcast rights are essentially designed to extract wealth.
How so?
Well, FIFA packages the television rights for the World Cup and sells them to massive middleman agencies. Those agencies then turn around and auction those rights back to underfunded local African broadcasters.
Like the SABC in South Africa or SuperSport?
Exactly. And because the local demand to watch their own national teams is astronomically high, these African broadcasters are forced into brutal bidding wars, paying wildly inflated premiums.
So the local networks basically empty their budgets just to secure the rights, and all that capital flows directly out of Africa and right back to FIFA headquarters in Zurich.
Precisely. And it isn't just the television money that is extracted, it's the physical talent itself.
Right, the academy.
The dossier heavily emphasizes that the best African players are almost exclusively developed in European-funded academies.
So Europe controls the pipeline.
Totally. A European club will set up an academy in Senegal or Ghana, extract the best 14-year-old prospects, move them to France or Belgium, and eventually sell them for 50 million euros.
And the local African club that originally found the kid?
They might get a few $1,000s in solidarity payments, if they're lucky. So yes, you have 10 African teams at the World Cup, but they are playing catch-up in a global system entirely designed, bankrolled, and ultimately owned by Europe.
It basically operates like an unregulated commodities market, but the commodity is human talent.
That's exactly how the author frames it.
Which sets up the ultimate what-if scenario posed by the dossier tomorrow, June 11. What if South Africa actually wins?
It's the big question.
What if Hugo Broos' ruthless counterattacking machine catches an anxious Mexican team cold? What if Ronwin Williams saves a penalty, keeps a clean sheet, and Bafana pulls off the 501 upset on global television? Does a victory of that magnitude shatter the narrative? Does it actually break the extractive system?
It's easily the most compelling question in the text, but the author provides a remarkably sober, pragmatic answer.
What do they say?
They argue that an upset victory would absolutely light up social media from Lagos to Johannesburg. It would trigger massive street parties. It would be an undeniable cultural event. But ultimately, it would just be a moment, not a movement.
A moment, not a movement.
Yeah.
Because the foundation underneath the celebration is completely hollow.
Exactly. The text points out that the underlying infrastructure required to turn a single victory into sustained global dominance simply does not exist at scale across the continent.
You need facilities.
Right. You need elite youth academies, massive domestic league investment, cutting-edge medical and sports science support facilities. One spectacular result on the pitch tomorrow doesn't magically fix the chaotic finances of the federations.
Right. It doesn't solve Safa's problem.
No. One stunning upset doesn't automatically build a state-of-the-art youth pipeline in Bamako or a new medical center in Kinshasa. The brutal structural reality, according to the author, would inevitably reassert itself the morning after the parade.
So an upset provides a burst of profound joy, but it doesn't rewrite the economic gravity of global football.
Unfortunately, no.
Which brings us all the way back to you, the listener, because tomorrow, June 11, when you turn on your television to watch South Africa play Mexico, you are no longer just going to be watching 22 men kicking a ball around a sanitized corporate stadium.
You'll see the whole picture.
Thanks to this deep dive into the LeftAfrica dossier, you are now equipped to see the invisible forces at play. You are watching a real-time collision of colonial histories, brutal structural economics, and the incredibly heavy burden of Pan-African representation resting squarely on the shoulders of a young squad with 500-to-1 odds.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I really want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. Something building directly on the realities the dossier has laid out today.
Let's hear it.
We have examined how the current global sporting structure is mechanically designed so that the massive broadcast revenue always flows back to Europe. We have seen how hosting these mega events, like South Africa did in 2010, yields virtually no permanent infrastructure dividends or sustained economic boom for developing nations.
Right.
The wealth is generated by the talent and passion of the global South, but it is ultimately extracted by the global North.
The system is operating exactly as it was designed to operate.
Which leaves us with this. If this system is fundamentally unchangeable from within, will the future of global sports eventually require the global South to simply walk away?
Wow.
Will we see a day when continents like Africa, South America, and parts of Asia abandon these traditional centralized tournaments governed by Zurich altogether?
It's the complete breakaway.
Imagine a future where they build entirely independent, decentralized competitions. A new, localized sporting architecture where they can finally keep the broadcast wealth, build their own permanent infrastructure, and openly celebrate the culture generated by their own incredible talent.
That is a massive paradigm shift to consider. Are the boundary lines we accept today truly permanent, or are they just waiting for someone brave enough to redraw the map entirely? Definitely something to keep in mind while you watch the logistics unfold on the pitch tomorrow. Until next time.